Good morning, everyone in the room and everyone online. The title of this workshop is Clear Language and Information Designed for Different Literacy Levels. And I will focus, and so will Idastiina, on easy language, being a part of a level that many people need in order to be active and to be able to participate. Okay, I very often get the question, what about plain language and easy language? Is there a difference? Well, to draw the line between the two is very difficult. But one thing that is for sure is that both are needed. And there is not a conflict or a competition between plain language or easy language. Plain language, as you learned yesterday, in Sweden, it is mandatory for all the public officials, all the ministries, the government, the parliaments on all levels to use plain language in the communication with the public. But easy language is for people who cannot, for some reason, understand and use the plain language information. They need something that is easier. So therefore, in order to enhance democracy and in order for everyone to be able to participate in the society, both are needed. But I will not give you the definition of where the line between the two is, because that is impossible. And it's really difficult to box in language. The language also is a reflection, a tool within its context. And the most important thing is that the language you're using, that it is workable, it is functional for the intended reader. So to build a strong and inclusive democracy, information must be accessible. It's crucial for participation, it's crucial for making choices, and it's also crucial for me to be able to speak up. Because if I don't know what it is to talk about, if I don't know what to choose between, how can I then make choices? And accessible information is actually a human right. And it is a human right to be able to participate in society, which means that it is a human right to have access to information and news, but it's also a human right to have access to culture. And literature, for example, is one part of, or one example of culture. So therefore, there also has to be literature in easy language for people who do not, cannot read the original versions. And on the screen right now, you see 3 examples of news, literature, and information in easy language in Sweden. The news is the newspaper 8 pages, 8 sidor. It is a newspaper in easy Swedish, and you can get a subscription and get the paper version, or you can read it online with daily news online. There are quite a few books in easy language in Sweden. And when it comes to information, the example I have here on the screen is from the election authority. I forgot to check what their official English name is, but the authority that is responsible for organizing the elections in Sweden. And it is from their website, and you see the red arrow. It points to a word that says lättläst, which is the Swedish word for easy language, easy to read. And if you press that link, you will enter a section of the website where all the information is in easy language. These are some examples of easy language products in Sweden. And it is so important that we provide the citizens, the public, with the possibility to be a participant in the society. But who needs easy language? Well, very often you think, okay, it must be for people that has a disability. It must be for people with dyslexia or people with intellectual disabilities. But there are so many more. A person with ADHD, for example, very often has a problem with the concentration, and therefore that person needs a text that is well structured with common words in order to be able to focus, to concentrate on the text. Or a person with Asperger has very often a difficulty to choose where to read. So if you, for example, I have a friend whose son has Asperger, and he's really good at mathematics, as long as you just give him 1 or maximum 2 problems on the same page. If he gets all the 20 problems, mathematical problems he's supposed to solve on the same page, he can't solve one of them, because he can't focus on which one to start with. But if he gets 1 per page, or maximum 2, he will solve all the 20 mathematical problems really fast and perfectly correct. Among the people who need or very often use easy language material is also untrained readers, while they're being trained. Maybe you're not that used to reading, and then an easy language version might be the first step for you to start being interested in reading, because it has so much to do with your self-confidence. If you have a bad confidence, a low confidence in reading, very often you decide, okay, that's not for me, because you don't want to once again feel that you have failed. And easy language actually helps people to build up their confidence, their self-confidence. And then, of course, in Sweden, easy language very often is used for communication and giving information to people that have Swedish as a second language. Because it takes time to conquer a new language. And in the meantime, easy language is a very good tool to use. And then I also want to add a target group of busy people. It was mentioned yesterday that people who have good reading skills really appreciate an easy summary that can give you the overall picture of the content, and then you can decide, okay, I want to know more about this, or this is enough for me. And I have, throughout the years, I have done quite a lot of assignments for the Swedish Parliament, written summaries in easy language on proposals and reports presented to the Parliament. And the feedback I have received is that the parliamentarians, they love the easy language summaries, because then they know if they should focus on this report and proposal because it has something to do with their, the local area they represent, or if it is something that they just need to have a general idea about and they will vote like the rest of their party is doing. So busy people is also a target group. And just to give you some numbers, 13%, this is a survey that has been done in Sweden. There is a new one on its way. It will be published this year. But the last one, it's called the PIAC study, P-I-A-A-C. And the result was that 13% 13% of the Swedish adult population could only read easy language text. 40% of the population could read a newspaper article as long as the content was something that they were somehow familiar with. They could definitely not read the debates or the, what do you call the part that the editor-in-chief usually writes in the newspaper. The editorial, maybe? Is that what you call it in English? Yeah, they could not read those. And another thing that is really interesting to know is that 25% could not use the internet in order to solve the problem, to find information, like what is the opening hours for the local library, or how much does it cost to go to the community swimming pool. And 25% of the adult population in Sweden could not do that. And we are one of the top countries in the world when it comes to literacy. You know, everyone in Sweden can read. It's less than 1% that are illiterate, but it's not enough to be able to read. You also have to have certain reading skills. I have been involved with a project in Sweden to encourage people with intellectual disabilities to participate in elections. And the name of this project has been Mitt val. Val in Swedish has two meanings. Val means election, but it also means choice. So in that sense, I think it was a very smart name of the project. Before the study organization Vuxenskolan, who was in charge of the program, before they started this program or this project, they asked people with intellectual disabilities why they didn't vote. And these are the answers they received. I don't think I'm allowed to vote. I don't want to go to the polling station on my own. I don't understand why I should vote. It's difficult to know who to vote for. I don't understand the information. I don't understand all the symbols. I'm afraid to make a mistake and vote for a party I don't want to vote for. Or they told me that I'm not allowed to vote. That was kind of the argument in the background why they started this project. And the project focused on how democracy is, the organization of the democracy in Sweden when it comes to different levels on the local, the regional, and the national level, how it works, you know, with the parliaments, etc. It also focused on how you do when you come to the building where you should put your vote. But that wasn't enough, because the more difficult thing to fix was that the political language is difficult to understand. So how can you understand what to vote for? I have some examples here. Donald Trump traveled to the American heartland to greet workers. What on earth is heartland? That expression was picked up by one of the Swedish political parties in this last election, and it was just as confusing when it was used in Sweden as it was when it was used in the US. A former minister of education in Sweden, he said in an interview, "It's not our ambition not to launch the program." Okay, are they going to launch the program or not? Another minister said during the pandemic now, when he thought that the speed of the regions to vaccinate people, because the regions are responsible for health care and hospital care and so on in Sweden. And he said, well, all regions must step up. That is not easy to understand. Easy language is part of accessible language. And for a language to be accessible, or for information to be accessible, you have to be able to find the information. We were talking about this yesterday. You have to be able to read it when you have found it, and you have to understand it when you have found it and read it. And then, of course, you have to be able to use it or do whatever the information is about. And I'm going to give you some examples. This is from the European Commission, and I asked them to translate this web page to Swedish, because that is an option. But there are parts of it that was translated. In the center column, the first one, departments and executive agencies, that part was not translated. Not easy to find then. Or, when it comes to be able to read it, because when you've found the information, you must be able to read it. And this is difficult, because we're using a very unfamiliar, or today a very unfamiliar font. That is something that stops people from being able to read a text or grasp an information. So the presentation must be possible to read, otherwise it's not an accessible information. And then finally, when you have found it, you have read it, you must understand it. And it's not for sure that everyone knows that Labour and Lib Dems are parties. That was actually the first time I saw the Lib Dems. And I must admit, I'm not sure exactly how it is supposed to be spelled out. Is it the Liberal Democrats, or what is the formal name? In order to understand this, you have to have lots of knowledge, and also to make gains. That is not easy for everyone to understand. So accessible information is information for the intended target group to be able to find, read, and understand. So what is easy language here then? Well, easy language covers the part of being able to read and to understand and to do. The 4 components of easy language is content, language, layout and structure, and images and visuals. And if one of these are not easy, it is not easy language information. It is not easy information. So it doesn't matter if you use easy words. If the content is not relevant, or if the content is very difficult, it doesn't help the target group that needs easy language. Okay. If I show you this word, what do you think? What does it make you think of? Well, oops. Maybe it is the county in England, or is it Clark Kent, Superman, or is it cigarettes? Wrong. I meant the Swedish pop group Kent from my hometown, Eskilstuna. But of course you had no idea that that was what I was thinking about. So in easy language, very often in the content, we have to add information for the intended reader to understand how to interpret the words. We also have to make sure that the information is relevant for the target group. This is the instruction I got when I was invited to give a presentation at the conference in Jerusalem. And there was a bus picking us up at the Tel Aviv airport, and the bus was leaving from the tour bus desk. And I got this map. And I thought it was really important to follow that map, start at the passport control, to pick up the luggage and then go through customs. And I kind of got lost. I couldn't follow the map. And then all of a sudden I was in the arrival hall. And then I realized it's first when I'm in the arrival hall, I can start looking for the tour bus desk. So actually the only information I needed is the one in the circle. But since this information included so much more information that was unnecessary for me, it was irrelevant. It confused me totally. So when it comes to content, we also have to reflect on what does the target group need to know and leave out the rest. See, this is... because everyone ends up in the arrival hall, right? So the content, you have to think about the content when you write easy language information. When it comes to the language, you have to use common and simple words. We don't use any idiomatic expressions. We write in active voice. We have a clear sender-receiver perspective, we, you, and we use informative headings. And you see, many of these recommendations are the same as for plain language. But here, if you have the target group that has big difficulties, the consequences are even more simple and common words and no expressions and so on. I have an example here. I had to find examples in English. So therefore, of course, you know, there has been a coronation in the UK. And here, the King Charles greets crowds in surprise walkabout on the mall. Does everyone know what a walkabout is? Maybe in England, but not in Sweden. In the mall, that is the shopping center for me. But I know it is a street in London. But actually, it's because someone told me it is a street in London. It's not for sure. So easy words. And then this about using expressions. Stepping into royal shoes. Many people with reading difficulties, and also people that are new to a language, they will interpret the language, the words, literally. Okay, so I'm stepping in someone's shoes. Ooh, no, I'm not. Or, you're pulling my leg. No, you're not. You know, pulling my leg means that someone is teasing you. But that is something you don't learn that in English classes at school. So you have to be really cautious about not using expressions. Active and passive voice. The ticket is validated upon boarding. Okay, how does it work? You know, the passive voice might include that you must validate the ticket yourself in the ticket machine on the bus, or the bus driver will validate your ticket. So whenever you're turning something into active voice, you actually have to know, you have to have the information, you have to know what you're writing about. And that was also something we talked about yesterday. In order to be clear, you actually need to know how everything functions that you're writing about. And I think very often we hide our own ignorance by fluffy, difficult words. Easy language is content, language, and then layout. And a layout must be clear and simple. We use informative headings, subheadings. Space between paragraphs, not to start a paragraph halfway into the line. Manual line breaks. Bullet points is really good. It's better if you use a bullet point instead of comma. You need to bring a sweater, comma, a pair of jeans, comma, your bicycle, comma. It's better to do a bullet point. And then you have to consider the typography. For most part, we recommend sans serif font. For a printed material, never smaller than 12 points. if you need to highlight something, you can use bold, but never italics or underline or block caps, you know. And I must say that I never highlight anything in a sentence. I make sure it is highlighted in the heading or the subheading. And then you have to be careful regarding colors and contrasts. So it is a good contrast between the background and the text. And don't put text on pictures. And you see a link there to a website where you have some more information and material about typography that is accessible. Okay, content, language, layout, and then pictures. I have an example here from the project My Choice. And here you can see the content is relevant for the target group. The language, I can guarantee it is easy words that has been used here, because I was the one who wrote it. You see there are headlines and sublines, and to the left you have pictures that illustrates what is actually said in the text. So images, they should help the reader to understand, support the text, and be easy to interpret. And you should only use visuals if they can do that, if they do support the text. Don't just use pictures for decoration and easy language information. Here is one example where they did not follow that rule. PRV is the abbreviation for the Patent Cooperation Treaty, a Swedish agency, and they are seeking a sharp web strategist. It is a fairly unknown national agency, especially when it comes to the abbreviation. But how would you interpret the picture? You know, the majority of the people who do not know what PRV stands for will think, oh, it must be one of the agencies that work with traffic or infrastructure or something. I have no idea why they chose that picture. It doesn't help, and it's a no-no in easy language information. A friend of mine, she has made a survey with people with intellectual disabilities and asked them how easy or difficult are images. And the result from that survey or Gallup was that pictogram is actually the most difficult, because you have to learn pictogram the same way you have to learn letters or words. And the easiest was photos that actually showed what the text was or the paragraph was about. Okay, so what did you learn today? I would encourage you to write a quick memo to yourself about what you have learned so far in this workshop. And then I want you to promise me that a week from today, you look at this memo and remind yourself what has happened for these 25 minutes that I have talked with you. But I do hope, I really do hope, that the 4 components of easy language will be part of what you remember, and the 3 keywords for accessible information: find, read, understand. The keywords, the components of easy language: content, language, layout, and pictures. That you will remember that. But the most important thing, you always have to have your reader in mind, the intended reader. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. I'm Idastiina Valtasalmi and I'm a doctoral researcher from Tampere University in Finland. And Ulla already gave you a nice overview about easy language in general, but my presentation is about only one aspect of easy language and will focus on that in detail, and that aspect is words. So the topic of my presentation is making word choices in easy language and plain language. And I included both language forms in this headline because easy language and plain language share similar features. And the principles I introduced today can be applied to both. And the topic of my presentation is very dear to me because I am just about finishing my PhD thesis, so it's very much related to my ongoing research. In my thesis, I look at easy language words from a text perspective and user perspective. And by user, I mean language user, so me and you and everyone else. So let's look at the agenda for my part of the workshop. First, I'll introduce you to some of the main concepts and give you some background information. And then I will introduce you to a very important criterion in easy language, and that is using general words that are familiar to readers. And then finally, I will teach you some methods that I have used in my research, and I'm hoping that these methods that are used in linguistics are also something that you can take home with you and use in your practical everyday work. So that's our learning goal today. So I'll start my presentation with definitions of easy language and plain language. And if you're wondering about the term easy language, because you might have also heard easy to read and easy read, so the terminology is not very consistent, so there hasn't been much research about easy language. But nowadays, the term easy language is used very often because it can also refer to easy language interaction. So easy language is not only about written language, but it can be used in all kinds of communication. So that's why I'm using it here. The easy language definition I'm using here is the definition that we use in Finland. Different countries or in different languages, easy language is defined a bit differently. So this is the definition from the Finnish perspective. So in this definition that says easy language is a form of language in which vocabulary, language structures and contents are modified to be more readable and understandable than in standard language. It is intended for people who have difficulties reading or understanding standard language. So in the definition, easy language is contrasted with standard language, but I guess it could also be contrasted with plain language because it is meant to be easier than plain language. And standard language is language form that has traditionally been considered as a language form that is common to everyone and it's understandable to everyone, but that's not the case because, like Ulla already said in her presentation, there are so many people who find standard language and even plain language too difficult to understand. So according to a needs assessment that was published in Finland in 2019, there are up to 750,000 people in Finland who might benefit from easy language. That is, they are people who belong to the target groups of easy language or easy Finnish that I will tell you more about in a minute. So easy language is different from plain language, although they do share some common features. They are both meant to make texts and language more accessible, but there are also some differences. So here I have the definition of plain language that was also introduced yesterday. It's from International Plain Language Federation. And the plain language definition goes as follows. A communication is in plain language if its wording, structure, and design are so clear that the intended readers can easily find what they need, understand what they find, and use that information. So if you're wondering how to write in easy language, then a good strategy might be first to think about how you would write the text in plain language and then start reducing complexity on all levels. So you would reduce complexity on word level, on text level, on visual level, and also contents, structures, everything. so it goes throughout the text. So that's what I would suggest. Texts may represent different kinds of barriers to access. And in this slide, I have a list of barriers to communication that I have quoted from researcher Isabel Ring, who has studied accessible legal communication. And the text that I'm referring to here is written in German, but the same contents can also be found in English in a book edited by Christiane Maas that I have also referred to here. So the first barrier on the list is a sensory barrier. An example of sensory barrier would be a case in which the text is presented orally and the recipient cannot hear. And the second barrier on the list is a cognitive barrier. The text represents a cognitive barrier if there is something about it that the reader cannot process. This could be related to abstract content, for example. And the third barrier type on the list is motor barrier. For example, if the text is in a foreign language that the recipient doesn't understand. And the fourth barrier is the language barrier. For example, if the text is in a foreign language, no. Did I say the motor barrier already? Okay, I'll go on. So the text is in a, so the fourth barrier is the, language barrier, yes. For example, if the text is in a foreign language that the recipient doesn't understand. And the fifth barrier is an expert knowledge barrier. And in these barriers, the text requires special knowledge that the reader is not familiar with. And that special knowledge can be related to expert content, that you need expert knowledge. And the same barrier is also somehow related to expert language barrier, because if you have expert knowledge, then you also need expert language to express that. And then there are also cultural barriers, and that means that the recipient might not have all information about culture that they need to understand the content, and you might add something to the text to explain that. And then there's also the media barrier that could be related to presenting information through media channels that the recipient might not use. So easy language and plain language can both be used to reduce these barriers to access. But, for example, plain language could be used to reduce language barriers, also expert language barriers, maybe even expert knowledge barriers, but easy language can be used to reduce cognitive barriers, especially. So when you're writing text, you should kind of consider the recipients and see what kind of barriers they might face, and then just start focusing on those barriers and reducing them one by one, and try to make a decision in case of every text you write. So Ulla already presented some target groups of easy language, but here I'm presenting how they are defined in Finland. Target groups for easy language include people with an innate and probably lifelong need for easy language, and that could include people with cognitive disabilities, for example. And then the second group includes people whose linguistic skills are impaired during their lifetime, for example, people with memory-related illnesses, and we all could end up in this group sometime in our lifetime. And then there are also people with a presumably temporary need for easy language, for example, second language learners. So those are the three target groups for easy Finnish. And then since the target groups have been defined in those three groups earlier, it has been noticed recently that that kind of definition might not be sufficient. So a new discussion has started about new target groups that are based on difficulty levels of what kind of language these people need. So the first group is related to advanced level easy language, because easy language is written in Finland on 3 difficulty levels. So this is the advanced level that resembles plain language, and the difference between advanced level easy language and plain language is not quite clear. But it's intended for people who read independently and also people who have minor reading difficulties. And then there's the basic level easy language. Most easy language texts in Finland are written on this basic level. So easy language media texts and administrative texts are published on basic level easy language. And it's meant for people who read independently and people who find standard Finnish too difficult to read and understand. And then there is the easiest level of easy language, and that's meant for people who are not likely to read independently and people who have severe reading difficulties. And when you're writing text in plain language, you are basically just including people in the first group of the difficulty level list. So if you want to include also the people who find plain language too difficult to understand, then you should write the text in plain level, basic level easy language, and then you would be able to understand that too. So if your target audience would include, for example, adults who are able to read independently, then basic level easy language would be a good choice. But target audiences for easy language texts may be different from target groups for easy language. So ideas about target audiences' language skills and previous knowledge guide the writer's choices about the difficulty level and style of the text. And here I have some examples of easy language texts that have been published in Finland. For example, Kela, that takes care of social security in Finland, they have published their benefit brochures only in Easy Finnish. They also used to publish them in Standard Finnish, but then they noticed that the brochures in Easy Finnish were very popular because people could follow the instructions, and no one ever said that, oh, I wish I would have had a more difficult version of this brochure. So now they only publish the text in Easy Finnish, and they are meant for everyone, whether they need easy language or not. And then we have news in Easy Finnish, Finnish Broadcasting Company, Yle broadcast news in Easy Finnish, and they are freely available for everyone to watch. So the preliminary target group was originally people who have moved to Finland and are just learning Finnish, but they are broadcast on national TV and in radio every day. So the real audience is probably different from the target audience. And then we have basic level Easy Finnish newspaper, Selkosanomat. It's published in print and in online. And then it has kind of like a sister version of the same paper that is written in easy level Easy Finnish. And some of the news articles are actually adapted from basic level Easy Finnish into easier level Easy Finnish. And that's also published online. I have included all these in my references of my presentation, so if you want to look at them, how they look visually, because there is quite a big difference between them. Yeah, so even if you don't understand Finnish, don't be put off by that. You might be learning a lot just by looking at them. And then we also have Easy Finnish literature. For example, the target audience for a book could be young people who like detective novels. So that means that each text has its own target audience. So there are the actual readers and the intended readers. And here I have quoted a translation researcher, Brian Mossop, who has said, a reader reaction to translation can be considered from 2 points of view. From the point of view of reception, there is an actual reaction of the reader, and from the point of view of production, there is the reaction imagined in the mind of the translator. So you could also imagine that when you are writing a text in easy language, you imagine your target reader and what kind of skills and background knowledge they have, and then you try to imagine what kind of reaction they have, and then write your text accordingly. So now let's move on to how to assess frequency and familiarity in words. I have included here a quote from Easy Finnish Indicator, that is a tool for easy language experts and researchers in Finland, and it includes the criteria for Easy Finnish, and it has also been translated into English. So if you want to look at what kind of criteria easy language texts in Finland have on text level, word level, visual level, sentence level, then you'll find all those criteria in the Easy Finnish Indicator. And the first criteria related to words is the text mainly contains general vocabulary evaluated as familiar to the readers. And one way of assessing word frequency in linguistics is called objective frequency. So it refers to frequency in which words occur in texts. So you basically take a text and count how many times a word occurs in that text. And it's one of the most important parameters in linguistics on how to describe words. So here I have collected some words from a frequency list of nouns, and it tells how frequent they are per million words. So that is just one way of assessing frequency, and I don't expect you all to go to Text Corpora and start to check word frequencies, but there are frequency dictionaries that are published in different languages. So if you just look them up online, you might see if there are any frequency information that are either in form of dictionaries or lists that are published in your language, or then there are also some text corpora that are freely available online. So you can look for information. But the important thing to remember about objective frequency is that if you the objective frequency depends on where it is counted from. So if you look at how often a word comes up in administrative texts, and then you take another text corpora that consists of poetry, you might find that the same word is not as frequent in there. But objective frequency, especially when it comes to the most frequent words, is a good indicator of what kind of words are common. But then there is also another way of assessing frequency that might be more useful to you in your everyday work, and that is subjective frequency. So everyone has their own personal experience of word frequency, and some words are encountered more often than others. So subjective frequency basically means that when you think about a word, you think about how often you hear, read, speak, or write the word, or encounter it in any format in your environment. So here I have included this scale from researchers Bellotta and Pelotti and Cortese, and they have made a 7-point scale with which they assess how often they encounter words. But since it is subjective frequency, it's also important to remember that it's only from your own viewpoint. So, for example, I might encounter the word subjective frequency quite often because I'm a researcher who has written an article about this, but maybe you haven't encountered it quite as often. So that's one thing to consider when you are assessing subjective frequency. And here I would like you to take a minute to look at the words that I already mentioned earlier in the slide and try to decide, think to yourself how often you encounter the words below. I'll give you a minute to look at them, and encountering maybe hearing, reading, speaking, or writing. We'll have a short discussion with people in the room afterwards. So, which words do you encounter most often? Anyone in the room? Home. Does everyone agree? I see nodding here in the room. Are there any other words that you encounter very often? Choice. Yes. But what are the words that you don't encounter very often? Components. So that's yes. So you said, could you repeat the words so I can say them in the microphone?
Parts
So component, parameter, and yes. So a person working in science might meet words such as component and parameter, but then other people might not encounter them as often. So just what I said earlier, it is subjective. And now let's move on to how to assess word familiarity. So when we talked about subjective frequency, or how often you encounter the words, it means that you don't really need to understand the word if you encounter it. For example, you could encounter the word democracy but not be able to explain what it meant. But the familiarity is related to how well you know the meaning of the word. So familiarity means conceptual familiarity, in which the person knows the content, knows the concept that the word and its meaning refer to. So that's the difference between familiarity and subjective frequency. And again, I would like to look at the words and assess how familiar they are to you. So if the words are very familiar to you, you use the word, so you must know the meaning of the word, and you're able to explain it. And if the word is very unfamiliar to you, you have never even heard the word before. So, and everything in between there is also possible. So now take a minute again to look at the words, and let's have another discussion about which words are familiar and unfamiliar to you. So, what would you say? Which words are very familiar to you? Anyone in the room can speak up. Yes.
I'm quite familiar because I did a lot of staff casework with translation. So I feel very comfortable with worker and employee and the distinction between the two.
A worker and employee, yes.
Because we would use them a lot, but we wouldn't use them interchangeably. So with that, I would feel comfortable using it correctly, explaining it to someone else. But then I think about things like part and component, and it's a bit more. We seem to use component and element interchangeably a lot in trademark cases, and I don't know if I would actually be able to explain to a reader exactly why we use component rather than element.
So you're not sure about the difference between part and component, or wouldn't be able to explain it, like define it? Yes, yes. Yes, so element is more familiar to you than component, you would say. Then. Yes. So, do any of you others have any options about which words are very familiar or very unfamiliar? If not, then we'll take another look at the words from a different perspectives. So I'm asking you to look at the words again and decide which words of each word pair you usually use. And using the word includes speaking and writing. So, what would you say? Which word do you use more often, home or residence? Home. There seems to be a very strong consensus here. How about part or component? Part. I see nodding here. How about worker or employee? Yes. It's not always very straightforward to even know which word you use more often if you use them both. But how about choice or option? Choice. I see nodding here again. And limit or parameter? Yes, they share some of the same meanings, but they're not interchangeable. Limit, would you say limit or parameter? Yes. 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 And that is also something that is used in easy language, because sometimes when you are trying to choose synonyms or explain things, they don't need to have exactly the same meaning because you use them in a context. So you choose an alternative that could be used in that particular context, and then you could choose something else that is used in different context. So the words are not in a text just independently, like in this task. So I will finish my presentation with a quick conclusion about things that I would like you to take home with you. So the first thing is that easy language makes communication accessible to people who find plain language too difficult to read and understand. And writers of easy language text should form an idea of target readers and their previous knowledge and language skills and barriers to access. And these can be used as a guideline to keep the style and difficulty level of the text consistent. And words that are familiar and frequently used are suitable for easy language, and frequency can be assessed from objective and subjective point of view, and familiarity can be assessed from a subjective point of view. But then it's also important to remember to consider from the point of view of your target reader, but also from your own point of view, because that's probably the only point of view that you have during the production phase. So in production phase, writers of easy language text can make hypotheses about which words are familiar to target readers and which words they encounter in their environment. And that's just the hypothesis, but that's the best you can do at that moment. In an ideal situation, you would have people from the target groups or the target readers testing the text, but then that would be testing the usability of the text. So that's not always possible.